Today we're going to be doing our 1.6 notes midpoints. Our goal today will be to find the midpoint between two coordinate points. Now, we've done midpoint between 2 points on a number line. So for instance, if I said here's the number line, and if this was at 2 and this was at 6, find the midpoint, and we found the midpoint by adding 2 and 6 together. So we're finding the average of 2 and 6, so we would add 2 and 6 together and then divide it by 2. So add the top first, it would be 8 over 2, which is going to be 4. So that midpoint would be here, and the location of it would be 4. Now, we are going to do this with coordinate points, which as you can see, I drew a coordinate grid over here. This is the point 2, 3, because you go right 2, up 3. There's Q. Over here we have P. -2, -1, you go left 2, down 1 to get to -2, -1. So you should remember this from your Algebra 1 class, how to plot points. So we have this line segment PQ, and if we have to find the midpoint of it, what we're going to do is we have to take, and we're finding the average, okay? So the X coordinate is on this number line. This is your X-axis, this is your Y-axis. So on the X-axis, I'll actually put these as different colors. Your X-axis, you have 2 and -2. So what would be the average of 2 and -2, or where would the middle of 2 and -2? Now this drawing is not drawn to scale, but if I were to take the average of -2 and 2, the exact middle would be at 0. So the midpoint of PQ, segment PQ, the X coordinate is going to be 0. And I find that because you're going to take 2 and -2 and then divide it by 2 because you added two numbers together. So this is 0 over 2, which is just 0. That's where that 0 comes from. Then for the Y coordinate, your Y coordinate is going to be -1 and 3. So we have to find the average of -1 and 3. So to find the average, you're going to take -1 and add 3 to it. We're going to divide it by 2. So that's 2 over 2, which is 1. So that's where 1 comes from. And as you can see, if I were to plot that as a point, 0, 1 would be right here, which you can see that looks kind of like the midpoint. I mean, like I said, this isn't drawn to scale, but we know then that that's the midpoint. It broke the segment into two congruent segments. Okay. We did another example here with MN. So the average of 1 and 2 is going to be 1.5, which you can see right there. You would add 1 and 2 together, you get 3, cut it in half, you get 3 halves. You could write that also as 3 halves. I would not have a problem with that. That would be fine. To get the -2, you have -1 and -3, so add those together. We're going to cut that in half, so we're at -4 over 2, which is -2, which you can see is right there in that coordinate point. And I already marked that point on that graph. Is at 1.5, -2. So to the right, 1.5, down 2, and there it is. The midpoint formula. So how do you write this formula? You're taking the average of the x's. So you're going to add up all the x's together. Now, there's only 2 x's to add together, so when you're adding up 2 numbers, you divide by 2. If we're finding the average of 3 numbers, you would add up 3 numbers and divide by 3. But in this case, midpoint is just between 2 things. So you're going to add up the 2 x's. So like we did over here, your x1 and x2 together. So the -2 and 2, or the 1 and the 2. So you're adding the 2 x's together and dividing it in half. Adding the y's together and cutting it in half. Now notice this formula is actually written as a giant coordinate point because that's how you're going to find the coordinate point that is the midpoint. Okay. Finding the midpoint with endpoints. So here I gave 2 endpoints. You first want to label which do you want to have point 1 and which do you want to have to be point 2. So I picked 0.1 to be this one here. So this is x1, this is y1, meaning this is 0.2, there's x2, there's y2. So from that, what we did to find the x coordinate, you're going to use the 1 and the -6. So we added those together, 1 and -6, dividing it in half. 1 and -6 is -5 over 2. Then in order to do it with the y's, we're going to do this same idea. 7 and -12, you're going to add 7 and -12. That's -5, and then you're going to cut that in half, making that midpoint is -5/2, comma -5/2. Or if you want to put it in decimal form, that would be fine too. -2.5, -2.5. Okay. Find the endpoint given a midpoint and an endpoint. Now this one is a little bit of solving, okay? So if the endpoint is what we're looking for, that's going to be filled into the equation. So that means what we got, so using this equation, x equals this. The x that we got with our midpoint is 1. So you're going to set 1 equal to, let me show you what you originally have here. You originally have 1 equal to x1 plus 3 over 2. You don't want that fraction there, so to get rid of it, that's when you multiply both sides by 2. Okay, that makes those two go away. On the left side, you have 2, and on the right side, you're left with just the top, which is x1 plus 3. Solve for x1, and you get that x1 is -1. That means one of your endpoints, the x value of it is -1. Then we're going to do the same thing with the y. Now, the y, we had 3, so we're going to set 3 equal to an n that we don't know, plus we know -7 was one of them, over 2. Again, get rid of that 2 by multiplying both sides by 2. That's going to get rid of that fraction. On the left side, you're going to have the 6 equals the top of your fraction here, which is y1 plus -7. Or y1 minus 7. It doesn't matter how you write that. Since you want to undo the -7, you're going to add 7 to both sides. We get that y1 is 13. So then what we're going to do is we take this information and we write it as the endpoint. Now let's double check our work. What would be the middle of the endpoint 3 and -1? So add them up. You get 2. Cut it in half. You're back at 1. -7 and 13. Add those up. You're at 6. Cut it in half. You're at 3. Notice the midpoint is correct if these are your two endpoints. Make sure that makes sense when you go to do something like this. Okay?